So here I'll be taking you through Origin UL's application. It's a simple application where you could come in and register yourself as a new user, or you could use your Google credentials to log in. It lets you authenticate to your Google credentials and brings you back onto the landing page. And here you can see when you arrive at the application at the first place, you get an option to view some of your original projects, or you can set up a new project by simply giving name. Say, for example, my test app. You can provide the endpoint that you are testing against, and you can give the authorization key. So this authorization key is not visible to us, so it'll go and get saved in our key vault so that it is securely placed and your application is not compromised with as it's being tested. Here, I'm not going to set up a new project because I've already got one set up. So I would just go and open one of the existing projects. So when you open the existing project, here on the left side, you can see you've got something called as data sets, and you've got this tab called as evaluation, right? And the third one is the history tab, which actually gives you the history of all of the experiments that you would have run. Now, from a applications perspective, let's go through the data sets first, right? The very first thing that you would want to do is to set up your ground truth. So, what is a ground truth in the context of evaluation? So, ground truth is we setting up, say, for example, a data set. Um, so, you could name this data set as, let's say, s- data set sample, and you can provide some of the user inputs, right? So you could say, let's say if a user came in and said, "Hi, I need some help," as an input, you would provide the response that your chatbot should give ideally, right? So it is an anticipated response from your perspective um, to a particular user query, right? So that sets the ground truth for a particular user input. So in this case, let's say you want to say, uh, I need, there's a spelling mistake, so I'll just correct that. Um, so maybe I would say, "Hi there, I'm here to help," right? And then you might want to, do a multi-turn conversation. You would say, um, "I need some help with airways." So that's the application we are testing against. So therefore, I've given a relevant query to it. And then the agent might reply back and say, "Sure, I can. Can I know your name?" Say, for example, right? So let's say it is just a simple conversation of this sort, and then I would probably have an ability. So let's say let's create multiple data sets to test my chatbot. Ensure you cover edge cases, right? So, so I've asked it to create 10 such sample conversations, and I've given my boundary, right? So I could actually extend this to say, "I wish to test the guardrail, which restricts the users to ask for more information not related to hairs," right? And let's say I would say generate, right? So it'll go ahead and create a data set for me. We'll give it a bit of a time, but if you look at some of the previous data sets here, uh, maybe you could see. So you can come back into the application, and here it could, it would actually display you all of the conversations which is just synthesized. You could actually go ahead and edit any of these conversation. Maybe you want to add, let's say, a please, so in between. So you could do that, if you wanted. And in this case, I don't want to do anything, so I would just go ahead and simply save it, right? So so therefore, what you've got here is one of the first key capability of the tool, which is to synthesize the data as per your use case, right? So you could actually, do this the way I showed you, or you could actually, upload a JSON. And you'll have to, in this case, if you're going with the JSON, you'll have to follow the format which is specified in the tool. But then pretty much, you could upload the JSON if you already have some data from production, or you had some sample data from your previous runs. So you could just come back and upload that and save, and that would pretty much do the same job for you of creating the data set, right? So here's the data set that it created for today's thing. And it has generated a bunch of data for us. You could clearly see it is trying to just do the same conversation in multiple ways. So therefore, it allows us to test against variations, pretty much. So here, we asked it to test for the guardrails, and then you're saying, oh well, do you talk about shampoos as well? And then it says, no, I can only talk about hair related topics. So here, if you see that, it is trying to bring back the context, which is what is expected in a proper run as well. So let's say if that's a ground truth, then what do you do next, right? So then you can go to the next section of the application, which is setting the experiments, right? So you can go ahead, create an experiment. You can give the name of the experiments. Let's say I want to say um, here India chatbot, uh, and I want to just give some logical name to it. So I would say, yeah, I'm running an experiment for here India chatbot, and then I would select, let's say, what are the data sets, and then I can select these KPIs, right? So these KPIs by themselves are set up at the backend. So it will evaluate the whole conversation for hallucination, which is like, it gives you any incorrect data which is not matching the context of the conversation. It will evaluate and assign the score against the relevance. It would check if the conversation had any toxicity. So basically, presence of any harmful and inappropriate language, right? Um, and then what you can also do is you can set up some of these parameters which are related to the particular business case, right? So you're not, so these are the generic ones that you'll have in the tool in build. But then you could define, let's say in this context, we're talking about hair extensions. So we could say context for hair discussion. So I want to validate if all of my conversations were strictly adhering to a hair discussion thing, right? And that's the guardrail which I meant. So I've got some test data there which I've got where it's talking about shampoo, and then we definitely want it to come back and only talk about hair extensions, right? So a particular example. Therefore, so I just introduced randomly two different KPI. I could actually delete one of them in a particular experiment, or I could add a bunch of other such KPIs. So um let's say I wanted to check, for a particular KPI, let's say, which says evaluate evaluate for mm, price, right? So I would say, okay, I am keen on, okay, maybe the best way to describe that would be check if the conversation has any price specific discussion, right? So I would just probably put that as one of the things, and I would add the parameter, right? So if I add that parameter now, uh, then it should, in the experiment list, if I can went back and set up the particular experiment again, she would say here India chatbot experiment. I can use the same name. Hadn't trusted that before, but here you go. You've added one more KPI, and you can select the KPIs that you are particularly interested in. So in one of the runs, let's say you had this one particular parameter going down that then probably you want to run the same experiment, but not with all of the other KPIs, only that particular KPI, because you're dealing with that problem and you've changed that particular, let's say, prompt or the agent you've tuned it, which you believe could be called as causing hallucination, right? So you could do all of that good piece in selective manner, right? Now it can let you estimate price. The price is driven purely basis the tokens, because we're using LLM as a just strategy, so obviously there's some cost associated for running all of these experiments, because behind the scenes it is actually simulating the conversation and then getting the response in the real time, comparing that to your ground truth, and then evaluating all of these scores, right? The running experiment part of it is as simple as we saying, okay, go ahead, create experiments. Now it's running it. It runs in a batch mode, right? So we'll let it run, but then we could run out, we could see some of the previous results. So if I just opened up the dashboard itself, here you go. Like in one of the previous experiments, we've got the scores in a very simple, intuitive manner, right? So in the context of hallucination, zero point 0.4 tells you there are 40% conversations which are hallucinating, which is a very high number, right? Yeah, so lesser the better in this case, right? Toxicity wise, again, 10% conversation probably had some toxic content in it. Then you've got the context, or whether it maintained in that particular data set or the experiment, whether it had context for hair discussion, and then fixation to the guardrail. So these are the two specific business related things that we build, and these are the by default KPIs that we've got, right? Then you've got things like what is the average response time and the semantic similarity score. So semantic similarity is nothing but both of the input and outputs which you're comparing are converted into vector, and then you do vectorized matching. So it's not essentially comparing character by character, but is actually comparing the meaning that it is trying to convey, right? So a higher score of 9.96 means about 96% similarity in the responses, right? There's a wee bit of summary around, the key insights that you run the test. It tells you all of what I was talking about. High similarity score, hallucination scores elevated. So there is action that's the developers need to take. Now, um, you could go into each of the conversation and see, a summary. So why it believes it did that kind of scoring. So you could go and see each of the conversations. You download the Excel report from here, and then once you've downloaded the report itself, this is how it'll look like. So it will have a summary section which tells you about the name of the experiment, when it was run, what are the sort of KPIs, what are the aggregates stored across multiple conversations, and on a high level, what's the rating that we're giving it, right? So A being the best because it did excellent in context fixation for the guardrails, and then maybe F is really bad in the context of whether you are evaluating it for the price or maybe for the relevance, right? So if 20% of times it's not maintaining relevance, then we are rating that KPI's performance as not particularly good, right? Now if you look at the conversations itself, there's a conversation ID allocated to each of the conversation, and then there are messages played from the perspective of user inputs as against what you're getting back from the response. So it's a simulated conversation for the input, which is then compared to the ground truth which we set up earlier, right? So after that, you could go to the last section for the conversation ID for each of the parameter which is evaluated. There's a score, there's a grade, and the summary, like on a high level, why it gave it that kind of score, right? So essentially in the Excel report you can get a lot of details which are pretty much there in the dashboard as well. But yeah, if you wanted to do a deep dive, then you can get those details. So that's what we have got right now. So from just to reiterate, from the perspective of what we've done, you set up your project, you set up your data set, you use synthesis capability if you wanted, or you upload your own data set. Then you set up an experiment. If you want, just run with the default KPIs that you've got previously, or you could create more parameters that you might want. And then once you hit, the experiment start, I, it would run in a batch mode, and there is a history dashboard which gives you detailed information of each of the experiments, which you can then go into, and then you can download or pretty much see the summary for a particular run within the same dashboard. Yeah. So yeah, that's what the tool is at this point in time. I think we are looking to extend this to have more capabilities in the product roadmap. Some things on the likes of how we could extend this to run multi-thread conversations to enable it to do performance testing, as well as do comparison across the two particular runs in a single dashboard view. So yeah, so that's pretty much what we've built so far, and the idea is to have non-technical users use this capability, um, and maybe technical users as well use this capability to continuous benchmark the LLM chatbots. Thank you.